Hi there, I'm the_twig and I like analysing game rules. I've been going through the Player's Handbook Playtest 5 Unearthed Arcana, and today I'll be continuing with the Fighter. Before that though, I want to address something from old 2014 D&D, the Martial Caster Divide. This is the idea that the caster classes like the Wizard and Sorcerer are mechanically stronger than the martial classes like the Fighter and Barbarian. I believe that this is true. However, I don't think it is overwhelmingly so, and I also don't think that the casters eclipse the martials. Currently, casters can do some things that the majority of martials can't, namely healing, crowd control, buffing, and AoE damage. They also tend to have a toolbox of utility options. Martials, however, are much better at single target damage and tend to be the best targets for the caster's buffs. A full martial party is likely weaker than a full caster party, but a party with both martials and casters is likely stronger than both of them. I think that the martial caster divide is significantly less impactful than many people say it is, although it does still need addressing to some degree. The way I would do this is not to buff the martials outright, or to nerf the casting classes. Instead, I would give the martials some additional utility which they didn't have before, and also nerf the AoE and crowd control spells specifically. Whilst I can't talk about spells yet, because we haven't seen very many of them, my main focus in analysing the fighter will be on their utility options. Also, before we start, this video will require knowledge of the new weapon masteries. If you don't know about them, or just want to recap, I made a video which explains them in a decent amount of depth. So here we are in Playtest 5. Quickly worth noting is that because the fighter is a warrior class, they can take fighting styles as their free first level feat from their background. The first actual change though is that persuasion got added as one of their skills. This is a nice little addition in utility, although in practicality it means very little. It's really easy to get skills onto a character using background and species. Also, there's a rule I see people forget a lot, which says that if two sources give you the same skill, you can pick any other skill. For example, if you picked athletics as a fighter, and then your sailor background gave you athletics, you could decide that your sailor background gives you persuasion instead. No real complaints about this addition, but it is kind of meaningless in real terms. Now on to level 1 though. The fighter gets 3 features: fighting style, which is functionally the same as before, second wind, which got a small change, and weapon masteries, which is the big new one. Fighting style first. In combination with what I mentioned about backgrounds, this means that you could start with 2 fighting styles right at first level, or even 3 fighting styles if you're a human. Archery, dueling, and protection are as good as ever, and I can see reasons to grab 2 of them. But 2-weapon fighting is also a very strong choice now, given the light weapon buffs, and especially the dagger buffs. If you don't know about the huge improvement to the dagger in this playtest, watch the weapon masteries video I mentioned earlier. Also at first level, fighters get second wind, which is now usable multiple times per long rest, rather than once per short rest. There's an additional column on the fighter tables showing how many uses you have, and I think it's a decent number. There's also a second new column for weapon masteries, which is the other new first level feature. These are additional properties that you can give to weapons, and they can be switched out at every long rest. I'll be dedicating a big section near the end of the video to weapon mastery, weapon expert, and weapon adept, so I'll talk more about all this then. This is the utility I was looking for though. Moving on though, at second level, fighters still get action surge. It's had a fairly big nerf however. You can now only take the attack, dash, disengage, and dodge actions. As a pure fighter, this is pretty much exactly what you were doing anyway. The change is probably just to stop casters from multiclassing fighter, so they can cast 2 spells in a single turn. This is however one of the very few features which has retained its ability to recharge on a short rest. Like all classes, fighter now gets their subclass at 3rd, 6th, 10th and 14th. This UA has the champion printed, so I'll have a look at that in a bit. Now at 4th level you get a feat. In most classes I wouldn't mention this, because all classes get a feat at 4th level. However, the fighter gets additional feats. In 2014 these were at 6th level and 14th level. However, now the fighter gets these additional feats at 5th level, and the table says at 15th level. However, there is nothing actually printed here to show that. As such, I'm not sure if you're meant to have an additional feat at 15th level or not. Assuming you are supposed to have a 15th level feat, I think this is a slight improvement. People play at 5th level considerably more than they play at 14th level, so whilst there is no net change in the fighter because of this, in terms of actual play, people spend more time with their additional feat. Also at 5th level, like always, you get extra attack. This is pretty standard, no complaints. 7th level is Weapon Expert, which allows you to swap the mastery properties on weapons. I'll come back to this in a bit, so let's move on to Indomitable at 9th level. In 2014, Indomitable was an okay feature. It scales directly with your bonus saves. This means that it was great for things like Constitution saving throws, where your fighter has proficiency and a decent score, but pretty bad at things like Intelligence saving throws, where your fighter probably has +0 at best. Rerolling +0 on a DC 17 int save increases your chances from 20% to 36%. It's not significant. Now though, you also add your fighter level. This means that Indomitable now gives that DC 17 int save a 72% chance of success at 9th level, and it only gets better. This is a gigantic buff, and I'm really happy to see it. Indomitable was a feature I've always wished was more consistently good. I think it's worth mentioning that this also works on death saving throws, giving you a 95% chance of success on your reroll, with the remaining 5% being your chance of rolling a 1. As before, 11th level gives you a second extra attack. I do want to talk about this one. So I actually don't like extra attack at 11. This is a very, very niche opinion that I know has absolutely no public backing and also has no chance of being realised. There would be an actual outcry if they removed fighters 11th level EA. However, I think it uniquely imbalances fighter from the other martials. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen someone look at Brutal Critical, Tireless or Reliable Talent and say that it doesn't feel as strong as an 11th level feature should be. I think this is incorrect framing. I think that extra attack and also improved Divine Smite, or as it's now known, Radiant Strikes, are too strong for 11th level. The obvious counter-argument is that they have to compete with casters getting 6th level spells. However, as I mentioned in my introduction, nerf spells. Personally, I would like to swap extra attack at 11 and weapon adept at 13. I fully expect none of you to agree with me about that. Anyway, moving on from my terrible opinions, 13th level weapon adept. This allows you to put 2 different weapon properties on the same weapon, although you can only activate one at a time. Again, I'll talk more about this in its own dedicated weapon masteries section. 15th level is improved action surge, which allows you to action surge twice per rest. This is 2 levels earlier before, which I think is great. More fighter fun swinging around a big hunk of metal. 17th level is a new feature though, Unconquerable. This allows you to use your second winds to get more uses of Indomitable. By this level, you're now making saving throws with DCs around the 20 to 22 range. So if you have just +4 to your saving throw, you never have to worry about failing a save. Again, this works on death saving throws, but it's even better now. If you ever fail a death save, or any other save while you're unconscious, you can use Unconquerable to reroll and heal yourself, which immediately gets you up regardless of what you roll. The impact of this is incredible. 17th level fighters are horrendously resilient, and I think that's fantastic. Now, at 18th level, fighters get another extra attack. I've just said that I think the 11th level equivalent should be moved back, but I have absolutely no issues with this one. By 18th level, I think that high power things should be the norm. Barbarian is getting Primal Champion, and last level Paladin got Aura Expansion. I'm perfectly happy to see fighters get extra attack 3 a bit earlier. Finally, at 20th level, fighter gets an epic boon and a +2 which can go above 20, but must be in strength or dex. I don't like that it's locking you into specific stats. What if you're playing an Eldritch Knight and want to increase your int? I'm happy for you to recommend strength or dex WotC, but please don't force it. Right, before we look at weapon masteries, let's quickly run through the champion. Champion was one of the weaker fighters in 2014, but I'm actually not looking for huge buffs. I'm looking for small ones that retain the simplicity of the subclass. Champion fighter is meant to be the easiest class in the game, and I think that's a niche it should continue to fill. Adaptable Victor gives the champion a floating proficiency. This is fine, I guess, but I don't think it's really that great. You probably took most of the skills you wanted at first level. What I would really like to see instead is a floating expertise, or maybe even a number of uses of expertise each day. I think it's much more thematic for a champion to be suddenly incredible at something than it is for them to temporarily learn or remember how to do something. That seems too flippant and roguey. Also at 3rd level, improved critical. I like improved critical. It's mathematically not as great as other features, but it's meant to be simplistic, whilst also making more exciting moments at the table. I have no problems with it. At 6th level, you get an additional fighting style. This is 4 levels earlier than before, and I think that's good. Fighting styles are pretty useful, so this is one of those small, simplistic buffs that I was looking for. Also at 6th level is Heroic Warrior, which gives free heroic advantage every time you roll initiative. Remember that if you already have heroic advantage, you can give it to someone else instead. This is another small, simple buff, so great, although it is somewhat abusable by just starting a fight every time you want heroic advantage. I think that's fairly easy for the DM to prevent, but I wish they didn't have to. 10th level Superior Critical is a full 5 levels earlier, and again, I love this. You get the most exciting thing about being a champion earlier than before. Finally, at 14th level, Fighter gets Survivor, which has 2 effects. Defy Death gives you advantage on death saves, and you also automatically get up on an 18 to 20 instead of just a 20. This means that you have a 27.75% chance of immediately jumping up on every death save, or a 62.29% chance of getting up if you roll all 3 times. Again, I love this. It's really simple, but it means that champion is more than 5 times as likely to not lose their turn because they get knocked out. And what's more exciting than rolling an automatic revival on your death save? The other point though I'm less keen on. Heroic Rally gives the champion regen of 5+ con every turn if they have at least 1 HP, but not more than half. This is a good feature, but I think it's too much bookkeeping for the champion. Champion shouldn't require you to check if your current HP is less than half your HP, and then change it every single turn. On a much more serious note, if you are 1 HP above half, this feature encourages you to punch yourself so you can trigger Heroic Rally and regen to a greater amount. Any feature which encourages self-harm should not be in D&D. I know it's not technically official content, but for the same reason I don't allow players to play Blood Hunters at my table unless they are willing to reskin it. One good thing about this is that the turn after you roll your 3rd successful death save, you automatically revive, thanks to the new death saving throw rules. However, I prefer a feature that just said that. I think that Heroic Rally should be entirely scrapped, and Defy Death should instead have an additional effect which says that you automatically become conscious if you roll 3 successes. So overall, I really like the new champion, with the exception of Heroic Rally, which I think should not be in D&D. If you remember, at the beginning I said that the thing I was looking for here was utility. So far there hasn't been much. Fighters get Persuasion and a slightly earlier bonus feat, and champion gets Adaptable Victor and Heroic Warrior. That's basically it. Now though, I'm going to talk about weapon masteries, because this is where that utility is. The fighter gets the most weapon masteries starting with 3, and then getting an additional weapon mastery at 4th and 10th level. At 1st level, this allows you to have a melee weapon, a ranged weapon, and a utility weapon, which could be a secondary weapon with a different property, or something like the dagger, which you can use for a damage spike. Alternatively, if you use 2-weapon fighting, you can have your 2 melee weapons and a ranged or utility weapon. As you get more masteries, you can get more utility options. I was going to suggest a 6th mastery at 15th level, but given the 13th level feature, I think this probably isn't necessary after all. As for some sample loadouts, a 5th level fighter who specialises in polearms might take Pike as their primary for push, Shortbow as their ranged option because it has Vex, Halberd in case there is ever a chance to get Cleave off, and then Dagger for the free throws with Nick. Alternatively, a fighter who specialises in ranged weapons with the Crossbow Expert feat might take Hand Crossbow because they can use 2-weapon fighting with it, so why not just add Vex, Heavy Crossbow for if they ever want to support their team with push, Whip for slow so they can escape if they ever get caught in close range, and Dagger for Nick in case they want to use their bonus action for something else like Second Wind. You don't have to just focus on what your main option will be, you also have to think about your backups. In my first video about Playtest 5 I ranked the weapon masteries, and I've since thought about it a bit more and this is what I decided on. You might notice that even though I've put Cleave as 6th out of 9, I still recommended it. This is because while it's generally not very good, it can be circumstantially amazing, and since you have a spare mastery slot, why not just grab it so you can switch to Cleave weapon when it's good. At 7th level though, it gets even more interesting, because Weapon Expert allows you to swap what weapon mastery a weapon has. This is fairly complicated, so I've made a table to help explain it. Right, so on this table I've split the weapons between the 5 main loadout types, and then given 2 subcategories for each. For example, in the sword and board category, you might want to use a finesse rapier, which is not the correct pronunciation, or a versatile longsword. It entirely depends on your build. I've also listed the highest damage dice weapon which innately has that property, and I've written specifically which weapon has that property if it's especially relevant. If there isn't a weapon with that property, then it has been left blank. Weapon Expert can be used to fill in those blanks or to increase the damage die of some of the other cells. Do note though that you are changing the property for an entire weapon group. You can't have one lance which has topple and another which has push. All lances have to have the same mastery. I think there are a few really big standouts for this. First, and probably most importantly, giving a heavy ranged weapon topple. This is probably the best flyer killer the game has ever seen. It's incredible. I wouldn't put this on your main weapon if you're a ranged character, because you don't want to be knocking normal enemies prone on your turn, since that will give you disadvantage. But since both the heavy crossbow and the longbow are heavy ranged weapons, you can put whichever one you don't normally use in your back pocket with topple. Also on topple, a finesse sword and board character can use a whip with topple. I think that's likely a good enough improvement from the correctly pronounced Rapier's Vex that it might be worth considering. This non-heavy nick cell is specifically for the hand crossbow, which will completely free up your bonus action if you have anything you especially want to do with it. Push in other two-handed weapons can be upgraded a lot. Currently that's a 1d8 Great Club, but you could go up to a 2d6 Great Sword if you wanted. Non-finesse sword and board and non-light thrown are also currently lacking a push option, which you could put on anything with the versatile property, such as the longsword or the trident. The lance can be given any of the properties in the Polar Master column, which is important because while mounted you can wield a lance in just one hand. Finally, if you get given a cool magic weapon which has an undesirable mastery, for example a flame tongue longsword would have flex, you can give it a much better property instead. At 13th level there's even more to think about, thanks to Weapon Adept. Now you can put 2 mastery properties on every weapon that you have a mastery with, although you can only activate one at a time. The timing of this decision is kind of unclear though, because the description of the feature contradicts itself. It says, you make this decision before the attack hits or misses, but then the example at the bottom goes on to say, whenever you hit a target with your longsword, you decide which of those properties to use. So do you choose before or after you find out that you hit? I will probably play with deciding after you find out that you hit, purely because it makes graze better. Now, how best to use Weapon Adept? As far as I can see it, there are 2 primary ways to use it. The first way is to put 2 complementary effects on a weapon. You want to be using a mastery as much as possible, but sometimes a specific mastery isn't actually useful. A good example of these complementary effects is putting both push and graze on a Polar Master weapon. If you hit the target, you push them, but if you miss the target, you deal the graze damage. The second way to use Weapon Adept is to condense 2 weapons into one. A really good example of this is 2-weapon fighting. Normally you have a scimitar for nick in your offhand, but you want your main hand weapon to have a different property like Vex, so you need mastery in both the scimitar and the short sword. With Weapon Adept though, you can give your scimitar both nick and Vex, so you can free up your short sword slot. As are some other notable combinations, for anything which can get it, topple and push are incredible together. They're the 2 best masteries after all, and there are very few cases where you wouldn't want to either topple or push an enemy. In particular on heavy ranged weapons, this means that you can put topple on your main weapon, so you don't need to have mastery in both the heavy crossbow and the longbow. Push and cleave is also great. You can use your first attack to push an enemy towards another enemy, and then use your second attack to cleave both of them. And then graze is pretty good as a secondary on any of the 2-handed weapons. As already mentioned, it gives you something to do whether you hit or miss. As for some loadouts, let's use those same 2 characters. Remember that they have 5 masteries now, so for the Polar Master Fighter's primary, they might take Pike with push and cleave, and a push topple longbow as their ranged option. They could then grab a Vex Nick hand axe, which fills the role of the old dagger, but with a d6 now, a push topple trident, because it's slightly better as a strength build ranged option when the enemy is within 20 feet, and finally a topple graze lance for when they want to one-handed while on horseback. The crossbow expert's main will be a hand crossbow with nick and Vex to help them boost their damage as much as possible while leaving their bonus action free. They will also get a heavy crossbow with push and topple for team support and flyer killing, and as a melee option they'll take whip with topple and slow, because topple will give the enemy disadvantage on the opportunity attack when they run away, and slow will make it harder for the enemy to catch up. That's actually all they need, so their remaining options can be entirely utility. Maybe a push topple musket for when they want to do the full d12 damage, or a Vex slow light crossbow just in case range slow is useful. Fighters finally got their utility. They got it big time, and I cannot tell you how happy I am about that. Now though, it's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I'll probably do Barbarian next because there's one particular feature which I think is being massively undervalued by a lot of the community, so subscribe so you don't miss it. I'd also really appreciate it if you showed this video to a friend. That helps out a lot. I also have a Patreon, and I'd like to thank SK who's gone the extra mile in his support. Bye!